I mean, obviously everybody knows you from Step by Step.
Yeah.
Most people, at least, especially like my generation. But I mean, those who haven't followed your career, if they go on IMDb and look, they will notice that not only have you like acted in a million different things, but you've directed, you've choreographed, you've produced. I mean, you're kind of like a jack of all trades in Hollywood at this point. When did you realize that you wanted to kind of do all of that and not just stick to maybe, reading a script and acting?
I think for me, that began somewhere in maybe my mid to late 20s. It was at a time where Step by Step had ended. I had gone to college. I went to UCLA. I was still acting during that time, getting different roles and, still having fun, but kind of also pursuing this degree. Not really sure if acting was going to be the thing that I was going to keep doing. Awesome. But I was also keenly aware of the fact that I was living in a time in the 90s and early 2000s where the roles for women my age were not that interesting.
Yeah.
We were in a real like teen movie era, and not all the roles that I was going up for were necessarily nuanced, and I felt like a lot of the just being an actress in general, there are so many physical limitations on what you are able to play and the kinds of roles you're going to get. And those physical limitations also change with the ever-flowing tide of what is culturally in vogue. So
right.
It's really hard to try to mold yourself to what producers want or what the public wants. And I guess I just I wasn't confident in resting in that for the rest of my life, for my career. So I don't know if it was necessarily a conscious choice, but conscious or unconscious, I just started to make a lot of my own avenues and my own lanes because I felt like I couldn't just sit around and wait for the phone to ring. Because even when I got really close on jobs and it was up between me and someone else, inevitably, a lot of times it would go to someone else. And you don't get a paycheck for being the runner-up. And you don't get a lot of accolades. People don't see you outside of that one tiny room as being like, oh, but it could have been you. You were really great, but we just decided to go a different way. Or we just decided to go with someone a little taller. Or we just kind of wanted a brunette. And that, I think, was something that I just couldn't wrap my brain around. So it started really with, I did a lot of theater, and that was something that gave me a home. It gave me a place to go. It gave me a friend group. It gave me an outlet. It gave me a lot of confidence. And it was just a place I could really just be myself without a lot of judgment. And I made some of my best friends in theater. And kind of through that, through that act of live performing, through making a group of friends that were actively putting on their own shows and writing their own stuff and putting it up, I just grew to gain more confidence in the fact that I could maybe do that too. So it started with that, and then it started with a live show that I put on. It was a storytelling show called Worst Ever, and we did it in the basement of a Mexican restaurant. And that grew into, a TV pilot that we made for Pop TV, and then it grew into a podcast. And so there were just all these different avenues that I started to get my hands into, and it was really satisfying. It was satisfying to be able to have an idea in your brain and then either put it on paper and go shoot it and put it in a film festival and get noticed for it, or put it up on stage and have your friends come and see it. It felt like tangible to me. So that's kind of where it started. That was in my, like I said, my mid to late 20s. And it sort of evolved from there. And from some of those things, I got noticed. And I think the digital series I did called Lakin, that I did literally just because I thought it was fun. I had an inspired idea. I wrote it down. I collaborated with some friends. I begged, borrowed, and stole from everybody I could for locations and talent. And we made it super fun. It went to festivals. It was like a great experience and one of the highlights of all the things I've done. And then years later, I think that paid dividends in that it caught the attention of a producer and named Jimmy Fox, and he was putting Hollywood Darlings together, and it reunited myself and Beverly Mitchell and Jodie Sweetin. And that was like a whole other part of my career that I got to kind of go back into producing and acting in a show. And I think it was really because of that, like that little engine from, years prior. So all of those things, I think, were finally leading me to one point, which was that I realized, I think what I've produced and I've written things and I've put up live shows and I've executive produced stuff and I've acted in things. I've done all of these different jobs. I've choreographed shows. And I think the thing I'm supposed to do with all of this knowledge is direct. I think I'm actually supposed to be sitting in like the captain's seat. And because I know how to do all these things. And innately, I've been on so many sets and I've been around so many actors that I think that's actually how I'm supposed to be using my skills. So then it just took me a long time to like get my pinky toe in the door
Sure,
and muscle my way in, and get someone to trust me with all that money. Right. Because it's a lot of responsibility, and people want to make sure that you know what you're doing. And
right. Yeah, that kind of answered one of my questions, because I saw Love and Lakin was like kind of, at least on IMDb, listed as your first kind of directorial work. And I was curious about that. If that kind of people caught that and took it and was like, all right, you know what you're doing. Like, let's get you in on this project and, keep moving forward like that.
I mean, I think it's never really one thing. I think it's always
like a body of work.
Always a couple of things. Yeah. And I think that was maybe the first thing that got me some attention. But then really when I realized like directing was what I think I'm supposed to be doing, I directed everything I could get my hands on for free, for whatever anyone wanted me to do, I would do, if it was a Funny or Die video, if it was a friend's music video, a short that my friend wrote and thought would be cool. I'm like, great, get me in there. I'll do it. I was doing any and everything because I needed to make a reel. I needed to show people that I knew how to do this job. And that's what you have to do. You have to just start doing the job and show people that you can do the job and you understand how to put it together. You understand what the shots are. You understand how to storytell. So that was the right thing to do at the time, because I needed, when the opportunity presented itself, which was on the Goldbergs, because I'd been choreographing on that show at that point for almost 6 years. And I knew people, and I was sort of, the connections were made and the trust had been established. And I had made a lot of really big advocates for myself. And that was so key. So that was like where the opportunity was. And then I had to submit my work. And had I not done all of those little things,
right,
even though in my mind, I was like, I had imposter syndrome. I was like, really? This real? This is what I get to show? I'm so embarrassed. Like, they're going to hate it. I can't believe I have to show this. Like, I was just like, well, what else was I going to show? You can't show all your body of work as a television director when you've never had the opportunity to direct television. You have to show what you have. And that sometimes is just enough. It's just enough to have someone go, okay, they understand what they're doing. And everybody's vouching for this person. So we'll take a shot. We'll take one shot on this person. And then you have to deliver. Like, you have to really deliver. That's your shot. And if you don't deliver like more than anybody else, it's like, that's it. You're done. It's like 110%. Absolutely.
How did you feel like, looking back, that first episode of Goldbergs that you did direct, getting that opportunity? How did you feel after you had done it? Did you feel like, I nailed it, definitely going to get more opportunities like this? Or were you, because, self-reflecting, it's always so hard to be like, yeah, I did really well. I mean, it's anyone who's ever done a job interview, it's like, I think I did really well in that interview. I have no idea if I'm going to get the job, but I think I did okay. You know what I mean? Or you can sometimes tell right off the bat, like, I mean, obviously you did well because you've directed more episodes, but if you do a job interview, sometimes you're like, yeah, I screwed up. I'm not getting that job.
Yeah. I mean, and as an actor, you know that too, because I have auditioned so much. When you nail it. When you nail it in the room and everybody laughs and they love you and you walk out, you may or may not get the job, but you did great in the room. And you also know when you bomb. And it's a terrible feeling to bomb. It's a really bad feeling. And you're kind of like, get me out of this room. You just can't get out fast enough. No, I felt like I did my job. I felt like
Okay.
I did a good job. Were there things that were learning curves for me? Yeah, of course. Were there things that I learned on that job that I then took notes and was like, I'm going to do that better next time? Absolutely. And I still always strive to do it better and better and better and more creative and more, seamlessly, and think of all the things I need to think of before the problem arises, all of that.
Sure.
But I felt like I did pretty well. And I got some good feedback sort of midway through the week, which is what you want. What you don't want is the producer coming down midway through the week and standing there behind you like, I got to watch and see what's going on. That's when you know you're in trouble. That's when you know, uh-oh, someone's here. What am I not doing right?
Right.
But when you get like, the feedback like, hey, it got up to the room, meaning it got upstairs to the offices, that you're doing great. And you're like, okay, awesome. Okay. All right. I'm doing all the right things. Like, just keep my head in the game. Just keep doing what I'm doing. Like, I know how to do this job. And so much of, I think, big career shifts like that, especially when you get an opportunity to do something at a new level or something that you've strived to do, but now you're like, here we go, gloves on, like it's my moment. So much of it is telling yourself, I know how to do my job. I know how to do my job. And I even have to remind myself of that, because sometimes it can be long stretches in my business of when those jobs arise. And you have to keep reminding yourself, I know how to do my job. And the moment you get on set, the moment you start, you're like, oh, right, I know how to do my job.
Right.
But the day before, you're like, do I know how to do my job? I haven't done my job.
I can only imagine, because it's like a different, I go to the same job every day, but like, you'll be at one job and then you're at the next job, totally different group of people, different, different expectations, things like that. Like, I can only
Different
imagine.
vibe.
It's literally like, starting new every time.
Always. Yeah.
And
the biggest thing is that it comes down to the basics. It always comes back to basics, and I think in actors, it comes back to basics. It's all about the work. Like, you got to leave the fame and you got to leave the BS and the cast member, whatever strife you're having with people, you got to leave it all behind. Like, when you get on set, it's about the work. And it's the same with directing. It's about the work. It's about the people. It's about the shots. It's about the collaboration. Like, everything else has got to take a backseat. So if you can really try and hone in on what the work is, then I think it can level the playing field that we're all here to try to do the same thing. And we leave all the other stuff behind.
Right. I want to backtrack for a second, because when you mentioned about having to put together your reel for getting into directing and everything like that, how big of a help, I guess, I mean, just even thinking back to when you started in the 90s, there wasn't, the internet wasn't what it is now. You have YouTube now, you have, even just TikTok, Instagram, Reel, like stuff like, anybody who wants to try to start directing something has a little bit more of an opportunity to kind of put themselves out there. Whereas 20, 30 years ago was not that big of a opportunity technology wise. Like, how big of an impact did that have as far as advancing your career on the directing side of things?
Oh my gosh. I think back to when I was a kid, and we didn't have the technology clearly that we have. I grew up without the internet, people. So internet did not happen until I was in like high school. So when I was a kid, my dad had a camcorder. We started out with a big one that went on your shoulder, like this.
Yeah.
You had to be like a muscle person to like wave it around at Disneyland.
Yep.
And then we got the one that was like this, and that was like
little
a real
handhelds.
revelation. Yeah, loved it. And that thing was my toy. That was my friend. That's what I wanted to do more than anything. My friends would come over on the weekend and we'd hang out for a play date, and all I wanted to do was make movies. I wanted to make commercials. I wanted to make TV shows. I wanted to make sketches. I did book reports that were like, hello, welcome to Book Report. I'm going to be your reporter. Like, these were the things I wanted to do. So I was always doing it. But I didn't have Final Cut. I didn't have iMovie. I was literally editing in the camera. So I have been doing this stuff. Like, I remember what it was like to have nothing and to have to figure out how to make it something all the time. Special effects, like all of that. So I feel like when you come from nothing. And then you're trying to learn technology. It's like, you can't believe the things you can do. I mean, even
Sure.
Love and Lakin, when we did that, like that was shot on 720. We didn't have 1080p. That
Right.
didn't exist. The fact that we even had like a digital camera that we had, which by the way was huge, was like a feat at the time. So yeah, it's changed a ton. The fact that I even had a reel to show at that point was literally because every one of my friends was able, to write something and decide that they wanted to go shoot it. And they knew a guy who had a DSLR, or somebody that might have had an Alexa, and we could borrow it for the afternoon. I mean, it was always about just trying to get somebody who had some gear. But
Right.
so many people have gear now. I mean, you
Right.
could shoot anything on an iPhone now that would look decent, like
Yeah.
pretty decent. And there's a lot of equipment out there that you can, I mean, it's amazing what you can do. And I mean, even in the last 5 years, it's like been a super game changer. So yeah, I think it's easier to make your own stuff. Absolutely. It's also nice as a director to play, because
Yeah, I bet.
when I was shooting this short about a year and a half ago, and it was a musical number, and I had the two actors in a rehearsal studio, and I was just playing. I was making up shots. I was playing. I was putting it together in my head just to see what it would look like on the day, and what are the shots I really loved. And I did that. I did the same thing on High School Musical. I wanted to play around with, because there's so much movement in some of the choreographed numbers that for me,
Sure.
I wanted to see, okay, I think it's this and this and this, but then I can take it home and review it. I can like make a little edit myself. I could never have done that with that camcorder.
Yeah.
I would have had like tape, and it would have been cutting it, it would have been like a nightmare. But yeah, it's incredibly helpful. It's a huge boost.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, the first podcast I ever did had to be at least 10 years ago. And I remember I had a mixing board. I had, a huge mic that I had to plug into the mixing board and to run certain cables from the board to my computer back to the board. It was, now literally it's plug and play. Like, it's so much easier than it used to be. Yeah. And amazing. It's funny you mentioned High School Musical, the series. So you have as far as directing goes, you have two connections to our podcast. One is that because we had, I spoke with Bart Johnson, who was the dad on the original High School Musical, and he was in a few I don't think he was in the episode you directed, but he was in a couple episodes of that show. And then Goldberg's obviously doesn't film in Jenkintown, but takes place in Jenkintown, which is about an hour away from where I live. So
amazing.
Couple connections. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, very famous in the zeitgeist of my mind, Jenkintown.
Yeah, all the Philadelphia stuff. We love the Philadelphia references here. Every time something Philadelphia is on TV, people around here go nuts for it.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. And speaking of like podcasting, you I think are 5 episodes into your podcast now, which is a rewatch of Step by Step. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
For sure. So this is the second podcast I've done. It is called Keenan and Lakin Give You Deja Vu, and it's a rewatch podcast of the series Step by Step. And I co-host it with Stacey Keenan, who played my stepsister Dana Foster on the show. And we have been recording this. We recorded a lot of it actually last year, and then weren't sure. We were trying to figure out what the format was. If we liked it, was it interesting? Did we have enough to talk about? She had come to me and asked me if I was interested in doing something like this, and I had never thought about doing a rewatch podcast. But with her, I thought it would be really unique and interesting because she's an incredibly well-spoken, very smart individual who left the entertainment business and became a criminal prosecutor. And the other thing about her and I is that we have a little bit of an age difference. So there are certain things that she remembers and certain things that I remember, but we remember different stuff. This was also my first TV show. I was coming from Atlanta. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and like the world was like so exciting and sparkly and Los Angeles and all of the things. And she had done My Two Dads and another series and been working since she was 3. And it was all just kind of like, whatever, old hat for her. in a way. And she also, the other thing I thought was really unique was that she's never seen the show. She's never
Yeah,
watched
that
an episode.
I heard about that. That's wild.
So this is the first time she's ever watched the show. So it's really wild to her to revisit this like some sort of strange time capsule of her life.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched every episode, but it's been a minute for me too. So yeah, we're like 5 episodes in. We recap the episodes. So if you're someone who loves the show or loved the show and wants to start rewatching along with us for all the inside scoop, we do that for about the first half. And then the second half, we talk about all kinds of stuff. We talk about things that are sort of jumping off points from episodes, such as, you know, breaking the rules when we were younger. What was it like to grow up on television? Fame, leaving the business, just really kind of in-depth topics of even what it was like to grow up in the 90s in Los Angeles. What was life like before we had all of this, all of the internet, and how is fame different now than it was then? Very different.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So it's it's been a blast. It's been really fun. And we drop every Wednesday. So you can find it everywhere you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I'll throw a link down in the description for anybody interested. And I think one of my favorite things, I checked out an episode before kind of preparing, and one of my favorite things I think was the introduction, because it gave me that like nostalgic like 90s TV show TGIF kind of like vibe. It was pretty sweet. I gotta give it, whoever produced that is.
Thank you. Yeah, Rachel Lawrence, who's a close friend of mine, did the theme song and is just brilliant. She also did the theme song for Lakin. So there you go. You might catch some similarities there. She's hilarious and brilliant. And I told her what I was looking for. And in about 5 minutes, she came up with that song, if you can believe it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's talent right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, so are you guys planning on doing all 160 episodes?
Well, we thought we'd see how the first 22 go, and that's the first season. And if there were people that liked it and want us to keep on doing it, and we were still having fun, then we'll just continue on until those things change. But yeah, we're having a blast, and it seems like people are enjoying it. And I mean, I definitely am looking forward to a season 2. And I think we're, again, not knowing sort of this kind of being a little bit of a test this first year. We didn't have anyone else on the show. We just did it, just her and I. We didn't have any interviews, but a lot of us reconnected at 90s Con about 2-3 weeks ago. We had a step-by-step cast reunion for the most part. And a lot of us were there, and she and I sort of, tested the waters to see if there would be anyone interested in coming on. And we got a lot of very positive responses. So
that's cool.
Fortunately, yeah. So I think we will be having more interviews with former cast members and having people back on to maybe either rewatch an episode or just come on and, chat with us about their experiences. So we're really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that always makes for good podcasting, like listening to that kind of, because watching it, especially those of us who grew up watching it, back then especially, you didn't get a lot of that behind the scenes stuff. So nowadays you do see a little more sometimes behind the scenes, and documentaries are huge now, but back then we really didn't. So stuff like that is always super interesting. And I think you might have access to my questions here, because I was going to bring up 90s Con. Oh, yeah. How was that? Because I saw that pop up and I was like, Connecticut's a little bit of a drive from here, but I was like, that is a really cool event. I'm sure it was probably jam-packed. I heard they might be doing another one in Florida later this year. I think they just announced. So what was that experience like for you?
It was so much fun. I've never done anything at that magnitude before, and certainly had never done a 90s Con, but I knew a lot of people who did. My friends from Boy Meets World had gone, and a couple other people from like Sabrina had gone, and everyone had great things to say about it. So when they asked me, and then I sort of talked to Stacy about it, and more of the cast started to get involved, I was really excited. I was really excited to go. A lot of us hadn't seen each other in almost 30 years. Wow. A lot of people left the business and are doing different things or moved away. So it was really, really special to see each other again. It was like having like a mini family reunion
Yeah.
or high school reunion, but with people that you were just like, homie, what's up? Like, and then you just kind of right back into your old, I don't know. It's like we're all the same, just older.
Sure. Yeah. Totally.
So that was super fun. And just the whole vibe. I mean, super well run, nicest people. The fans are the reason you go. The fans are absolutely amazing. I met so many lovely, wonderful people. I had so many great chats with people. I couldn't believe both Stacey and I said, you know, you do this stuff, you do this 30 years ago, you think, nobody cares anymore.
Yeah.
And then people come and you're sort of shocked at the fact that people are like, this was my favorite show growing up, or I just rewatched it again, or I'm watching it with my kids, or they say things like, you know, you really got me through some tough times. I was going through a tough time and this show was like comfort food for me. And I loved these characters. I loved this family. And, you know, I understand it because I grew up with television shows like that. Like I can't go to a hotel room late at night and not watch Friends because it's comforting to me. Because
it is also always on.
It's always on and I know all the episodes and it's like I can almost just fall asleep to it because it's like I don't really have to pay attention.
Yeah.
I kind of know the punchline already.
Yeah.
So that was really, really special and really amazing. And then it was also just so fun to see so many of my friends from back in the day who were all there. And yeah, it was a blast. It's a really, really wonderful, really special event.
That's cool. Have you ever, so around here at least, I don't know about where you're at, but there's always like different trivia places. And one that almost always comes up is French trivia. There's always some place that has like a random night of French. And like, I think that I kind of know Friends pretty well just because my parents watched it. I watched it. Again, it's always on.
Yeah.
Some of these people know the most obscure things about Friends and like those kind of shows. I'm like, how do you remember just completely random stuff? And even now, like, so it's funny because some of those shows, I don't think Friends is, but I remember when I was younger, you know, TV Land.
Oh yeah.
You know, when I was younger, all those like old shows that like my grandparents watched, right, were on TV Land. But now the shows that I remember from when I was a kid are on TV Land, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've hit that point. Like we watch Everybody Loves Raymond every night. Like
it's a great show.
It is a great show, but it's just so funny how like things have changed and like those shows are still relevant. Not even just like even people younger than I am, you know, watch that kind of stuff. Like at 90s Con, like I'm curious, I'm sure you did, but how many people were, you know, obviously probably millennials, but how many, you know, maybe brought their kids or even maybe a little older or younger than maybe you expected?
There were, I would say the age range was between, you know, mid millennial to probably mid to late Gen X.
Okay.
I'm the last year of Gen X before millennial. And I found people were somewhere kind of just older or just younger than me, which makes sense. There were many people that came with their kids who are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in that range. And their kids were watching for the first time and like loving the show. I have this up here. This is so sweet. I've had this on my desk since I got it, but this young girl made me an owl Swiftie bracelet.
Oh, that's cool.
And I am cherishing it. And she wrote this like the sweetest note. And I look at it every day and I love it so much. And it meant so much to me because here was this like next generation who resonated with my character and like loved it and like wanted to be just like Al. And so I got a lot of like, that was really cool. I got some comments of, you know, from men and women saying that I was their first crush, which I was like so honored. So yeah, it was really cool. And listen, like I was a fan, so I get it. Before I was on Step by Step, I was watching TGIF. I was a huge fan. So, you know, I watched Full House. I watched Family Matters. I watched Perfect Strangers. Like I watched it all. So I feel like I am one of the fans. I relate to all of that. Yeah.
Have you kind of gotten to meet some of the people, whether through 90s Con or other projects, just, you know, being on popular 90s show. Have you gotten to meet some of the other people from those TGIF sort of shows that maybe you were a fan of or had, similar popularity?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of the TGIF lineup specifically was produced by the same producing team. So Miller Boyett and Bickley Warren Miller Boyett was well known for Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy. They were giants in the TV world, and they helped create Full House, Perfect Strangers, Family Matters, Step by Step, and many, many other shows. So when we would have sometimes Christmas parties where they would get together and throw a really nice party for the cast and crew, sometimes our parties would commingle. So it would be like Step by Step and Family Matters. And we would all be at the same sort of gathering, and you would talk to people and chat with people. And they filmed like only 3 or 4 stages down. And Full House was also on the Warner Brothers lot, but they were like down and around the corner. Okay. So there was definitely some of that happening. Boy Meets World was a Disney show, so they were on a different lot. They had a different set of producers, but those kids on that show were closer in age to me. We were all like almost the same age. And because of that, a lot of times I would end up meeting up with several of them, Ryder Strong and Danielle Fishel mostly, at charity events. We did a lot of charity work on the weekends or events, so signing events. And then several of us were in the same acting class. Like, these are the people you run with when you don't go to a normal school in California, and I went to a school in Atlanta, and that's where my social life was. But when I was in California, I was like desperate for friends. So where do you go? Acting class. Because that's where all your other child actors are, just working out their crafts, and finding their tools and their triggers. To learn how to cry and things like that. And, but yeah, many of us became friends like back in the day, and then continued to be friends growing up. And it's awesome. It's always awesome to see each other and get together. I have so much respect for so many of the people I grew up with.
And not to make myself sound old, but I like that old man who's like, oh, back in my day, but like there is nothing quite like TGIF and like, the Friday night primetime shows. Like nowadays I love television today, don't get me wrong, because of Netflix. There's just so much that you can watch. There's so many well done documentaries and shows and things of that nature. But it was just like you had like all week, you looked forward to it. I mean, this was back before DVRs, really were a thing. Like if you didn't see it, you didn't see it. You know what I mean? Totally. And until now when it's on like HBO Max or Netflix or whatever it is. So it was
appointment television.
Yeah, and like I'm not complaining. Television now is awesome, and we luckily can all rewatch that kind of stuff. But it's very hard to explain to somebody younger, who's younger now, like what that was like.
I was literally on the way home today, and my kids asked me from the back seat, "Mom, what did people do before there were phones?" And I said, "Do you mean before there were cell phones or phones in general?" And they said, "Phones in general." And I said, "Well, they wrote each other letters." And she was like, my daughter goes, "But what if it was an emergency?" And I was like, well, they'd find a Pony Express and it might get there in 3 days. I don't know.
Drive there, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. But they just couldn't wrap their head around the fact that like you couldn't just call anyone. And I said, even when there were phones, like when I grew up, there was no cell phone. You had to be home to accept the call. And if you weren't home and someone was like, "Dude, I was trying to invite you to this party all day," dude, you missed it. You just missed it.
Yeah.
You missed out. And there was no fear of missing out because we didn't know what anyone else was doing.
Right.
You weren't seeing everybody's life and everything they ate that day, So
that's so true.
I don't know. I mean, there's something I personally, as much as it dates me, and I'm sure a lot of millennials be rolling their eyes at me saying this, but I personally am happy that I remember what that feels like, because I think that there's like a mindfulness to not being tethered to some kind of external world that is very hard to comprehend if you've never been without.
Yeah. No, totally. You talked about before internet. Like I remember we had a computer at our house growing up when I was in 4th, 5th grade, whatever grade it was. But it was I honestly don't even know what we used it for. All I remember doing on it was playing like solitaire and Minesweeper, but
Yeah.
we had other uses. I don't know what we used it for. I'm sure my parents used it for something, but
Yeah. I know we had that Apple Macintosh. Remember that little Apple?
oh yeah,
Like
we
the
had that in
tiny-
our science rooms, the like see-through ones
Yes. And then
with all the different
had to
colors.
put a disc in if you wanted to save something. And then, I mean, I loved it. I would write all my little reports on it, and
Yeah,
yeah, it was great.
I mean, what a time to be alive, right?
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
One more thing. Well, actually, two more things. But one, I wanted to talk a little bit about. We had the strikes this past year. COVID was a couple of years ago. I mean, how has that kind of changed your outlook on what you do, directing, and choreographing, any of it? Because I know a lot of stuff stopped for COVID. Stuff stopped for quite a while, for longer than I expected for the strikes. How does that change kind of your perspective on, I guess, like making sure that you can keep working?
Mm-hmm. In the macro, if I take like a bird's eye view of it and I look at all of it, the thing is, the business is always expanding and contracting. We're always doing that. When it was 5 channels and a handful of reruns on cable, people were making their shows like step by step, and I can't even envision the amount of money they were putting into these shows because there were only 5 things that people were watching at once, and it was all appointments. So of course people had the revenue to put in. I mean, that was TV in the 90s. It was like the golden years of television. I'm telling you. So, that was kind of where it's at. And then cable started doing premium content, and then we got into streaming, and that changed the model entirely, and still has, and still is. It's an evolving process. Before the strike, there were so many content outlets out there. We were due for some kind of contraction. That's just the way it works. So the strike, while necessary for many departments in our business, battling AI, battling this new media revenue, which is no longer new. It is standard practice. Most people have streaming and have cut the cord of cable a long time ago. This is now just where the business is evolving. That being said, it's going to and has contracted our business significantly. And that's just the way that's the economics of the way it works. So there are less shows being produced. There's another strike on the horizon with IATSE. I think a lot of us felt like after we couldn't believe it went on as long as it did. I think it was necessary in the long run. However, it did what it did. When we finally ended it, I think a lot of us felt like the floodgates would open in January and it would just be back onto the races. And that really hasn't been the deal. And there are a lot of people still out of work. And I think part of that is there's some trepidation with maybe investing in a show when there might be another strike looming. So I think if shows already had a season order, they're finishing their season. If they were already ordered, they're beginning their order. If it's a short order, they're going to make their short order before July. Like, these are the shows that are kind of going. There's a lot of companies that are looking through their development files and just deciding we're not taking any new projects on. We already have all these other projects. We're going to go through everything we have. We're going to go through our catalogs. We're going to just like close the floodgate of money. And that's fine. That's their prerogative to do that. So it affects it in many different ways. I think you're going to probably see a contraction in some of these outlets being taken over or conglomerated or bought by other places and maybe either done away with completely or enveloped in some way. But we've seen this happen many times over. Everything used to be independent producers. Back in the 90s, there were, Bright Kaufman Cranes all over the place. Lorimar was who produced our show. Lorimar in the late 90s became no more. I mean, there were so many independent producers that went down to like 3 because the studios changed the way they did business. And so is going to be the history of television for all time. And all we have to do is survive the ever-changing tides. I mean, that's what you have to do as a creative. You don't control it, and you don't control what people want to consume. You just don't. I mean, that changes people's mandates change all the time. There are all these people in development that are just like constantly trying to keep up with what people want to see and what they want to hear. We're looking for animation. No, we're looking for drama. No, we're looking for, so you almost just have to just like go with it. You just got to go with the flow. And if you're a creative that produces content, then you might want to have one of everything in your back pocket. I don't know what else to say. Always making your own lane and making really good connections and really lasting impressions on people will continue, in my opinion, to pay dividends in the future. People want to work with people who they trust and who they know can get the job done. So sometimes there might be droughts. It's like feast or famine all the time. So when that producer who loves you gets their next show up and running, that always benefits that handful of people who are on that team. And on the other side, if you're not in that camp and you're not in that group and you watch all your friends getting all these jobs and you're thinking to yourself like, but what about me? I mean, that's just kind of the way it goes. So on the other side of it, with COVID, I mean, COVID was challenging. I actually worked a lot in COVID, strangely enough. And I worked on the Goldbergs. I worked on a couple of shows for Apple. I did High School Musical at the end of COVID. The protocol was, it was a lot. It was challenging. I mean, getting tested sometimes every single day. Then it would go to twice a week, and then there would be an uptick in cases. Then we'd go back to every single day, and all the zoning and the mask wearing and the shields. Just trying to communicate with actors when you're wearing all of that PPE is really challenging as a director. People can't hear you. You're under all of these like masks and things. So, and they can't see your face. And I'm such an expressive person that when I'm talking to you and I'm like trying to tell you what I mean, it's like, it was a real detriment in many ways for that. It was also a detriment to be going on a set with people I didn't know that well and trying to create a vibe or trying to create a connection when I'm not even allowed to be close to you and you don't know what it looks like. That was all just challenging. I mean, it was challenging for everyone. I think some of the crew and some of the hair and makeup people had it the hardest because they had to be close to these actors. And the protocols were really, really intense. They were really strict and they were very expensive for production to continue. So a lot of other concessions were sometimes, I mean, there were shows that had to just end because they couldn't afford to continue with the protocol. So they just were like, sorry, can't afford it. We have to just end, which is
it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I will never miss those times. But I will also say that if I can do that, I can do anything because sometimes it was so intense and, quite frankly, for some people really, fearful being in close quarters with others and knowing that the COVID numbers were so high. And for me, if an actor gets COVID, we scramble. We do what we have to do. There's insurance for that. They go, they do their thing, they get away. We move on, we scramble, we go to another scene. We do what we have to do. We bring them back or we cut them out of the scene or whatever. Right? Yeah. If a director gets COVID, I just get replaced. I just don't work. So
that's unfortunate too.
Yeah. But I mean, and that's, a crew member, they can replace, they can come in, they can come out, but this is my job for these 2 weeks. And if I get COVID, like I can't do my job, but they have to keep going. So they just bring in another director and I go away. And I certainly didn't want that to happen. So I was in a bubble. Like every time I directed, I was in a full bubble. I went to concerts with masks on. I did not attend certain things, certain, social events. I felt like I couldn't because I could not test positive, full stop.
Yeah.
It just, I had to keep myself and everybody on that crew safe. And that was,
and the shame of it is you could have felt totally fine and you test positive and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, there was a day when, oh gosh, this was wild. There was a day we were shooting when it was something crazy, like 17 positives. And wow. I was like, what? Not me, but my first AD, one of the camera ops. And we were like, this is wild. And they were like,
Yeah.
hold on, we're gonna, it was like rapids. They're like, hold on, we're coming in, and all these people are quarantined in their trailers or whatever, their cars, and they're going to do another round, but they're not allowed to return until they've had another test, because maybe it was a bad batch. That's weird to get
Right.
that many. You know, we were like, yeah, that's really weird. So we did what we could, you know, like the DP was operating the camera, and we were, you know, turns out they were all false. But we
Oh,
went
really?
through that a
That's
couple of
crazy.
times. Yeah.
Wow.
Sometimes you'd get a bad batch of tests, but you don't know. You don't know.
Right.
So they have to retest all those people, and they have to retest them twice to make sure. And anyway,
That's
just
a
a
nightmare.
headache, just another level to think about, that you're in a stressful environment that is already all about.
Yeah. I was
time
going to
and
say, like television and directing is not already stressful.
yeah. But you know, what? You can do that, you can do anything. So
Yeah, no, totally. And like, you know, you would know this because you've voice acted as well, but I'm sure, you know, voice acting, at least you can be in a studio. It's a little more removed. I'm sure it's still, there's some hiccups there, but, you know, I didn't even know that you did all the voice acting you did till I looked it up, like tons of episodes of Family Guy, all different kinds of voices. Like, and that's the thing with voice acting. I'll see animated stuff and I'm like, is that who I think it is? And then I have to like look it up. And I'm like, oh my God, that is. And sometimes you don't always pick up the person's voice. So like, how is that experience different for you than like normal acting? And are there things where people are like, oh my God, I didn't even know you did that?
oh yeah, I mean, it's like the other career amongst so many of my careers that I've had, that I still do, that most people don't even know that I still do.
Right.
And I do it because frankly, I love it. I love doing it. And it's, I've voiced a lot of animation, as you said, and I do a lot of audiobooks, like a lot of audiobooks. Two things about that job. A, I get paid to read, which is like maybe the greatest job ever. And it can be a real 9 to 5. So in between some of my other directing gigs, you know, I can go sit in a tiny room and by myself, and frankly, no one really bothers me. I have a booth director who will tell me when I misread something or mispronounce something, but I get to just sit, and for, you know, from about like 9 to 3, I get to like read a book and make up characters and do different voices and storytell. It's one of the things I've always loved about the creative process is the
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. Where's the story going? Like and in the game I play with myself is, because sometimes I don't read the end because I like it to feel fresh by the end. So sometimes I'll read like to the middle of the book just so I understand the characters and everything. And then I play a game of, can I guess where the story's going?
Oh, that's cool.
As you read enough, you start to, you know, try to guess. And I love when I'm wrong. I love when it surprises me.
Yep.
But the other thing I love about it is that, again, as like what I mentioned in the beginning of this, which was, as an actor, you are very bound by what you look like, your physicality, and what the subjective nature of casting is. Mm-hmm. In voiceover, those boundaries are much thinner, because I've done books where my voice is the main character, but then I do a sundry of other people, old men, young boys, vapid girls, brainiacs, librarians, mystics, like whatever it is. And I'm coming up with and in my mind, I'm seeing these characters. Most are characters I would never get hired to play. But in the voiceover world, I can make them come to life. And I love that. It's so creative. It's so fun. And it's just like a real like departure. It's just like a fun, creative departure. Yeah.
And I still remember the day I found out, growing up watching The Simpsons, the day I found out that Bart Simpson was voiced by a female voice actor. And I was like, that's so great. Like, it's so cool. And you always see, you know, the credits, additional voices. That means that person did multiple characters. And that's just the coolest thing, when people can, you know, get creative. Like you said, you know, you're doing it for a book, or even if it's for a show, where you don't realize that, you know, two characters talking to each other on this animated show could actually be the same person, just doing two different voices. Like, it's so cool.
It is. A lot of women end up voicing boys because of the register. So That's actually
I've noticed
more
that.
common, yeah, than you would think.
When I found out, I did not know that, but as I've gotten older, I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it is.
It'd be very hard for me to do like a young boy's voice.
Yes, of course, as it should be, you know? And that's the other reason I think sometimes in the audiobook world, if it's a female doing maybe a male voice, you know, you can kind of lower your register a little bit and it can be passable. You go, okay, that's a different person. That's a guy. Got it. If it's a man who then is trying to do a female voice,
it's a little tougher.
Maybe it doesn't fly as well. I don't know. But yeah, you know, you just want to give like a little affectation so we know that it's a different person talking, just to kind of like lead through the story. But yeah, some people have told me like, oh, I love listening to you. I love listening to your audiobooks. You just have such a soothing voice. You always put me to sleep. Which honestly, compliment taken.
I guess that's a compliment. Yeah.
I mean, look, I fall asleep to Planet Earth all the time because I find David Attenborough to be incredibly soothing. So whatever needs to get you to bed at night, man, I'm
I know, right?